The following is a world-class Bullshitters exclusive.
In 1976, the television show Charlie's Angels debuted on the ABC network. The show follows the crime-fighting adventures of three women working at a private detective agency in Los Angeles. The original cast was made up of Kate Jackson, Jacqueline Smith, and Farrah Fawcett. Fawcett would leave the show over contract disputes after the first season, but the show continued. During its 5-season run, Charlie's Angels became a cultural phenomenon, though it had its critics. The show was criticized for being nothing more than jiggle television. Jiggle TV is seen as trashy and escapist entertainment. Programs, or female performers, are often judged by their jiggle factor, and many, such as Pamela Anderson, had their bodies surgically modified to increase it. The term Jiggle-O is used to describe a character whose jiggle factor and jiggle syndrome is used to discuss the phenomenon as a whole. Actress Farrah Fawcett was quoted as saying, "When the show was number 3, I figured it was our acting. When it got to number 1, I decided it could be only because none of us wear a bra." After 5 seasons and 115 episodes of Jiggle TV, the show Charlie's Angels ended in 1981. A small revival attempted in 1989 floundered. With no interest in that, Charlie's Angels would remain dormant until the new millennium. In the 1990s, films based on classic TV series were all the rage. In 1991, the film version of The Addams Family was released, spawning its own successful sequel, Addams Family Values. After the success of The Addams Family, there was The Fugitive, The Beverly Hillbillies, The Brady Bunch, Mission Impossible, Lost in Space, My Favorite Martian, Wild Wild West, and more. By the end of the decade, the fad had come and gone. But there was still hope that one more classic jiggly TV series would be getting a film adaptation. Fans would get what they want in November of 2000. Today's video is brought to you by me, Jeff Hicks, and my new book, Tits and Art. Tits and Art, or TNA, is my new annual project. It's a big 11x17 full-color book busting out with beautiful women and beautiful art. It's only live for 30 days, so I can guarantee delivery by Christmas. Sign up today, link in the description below. Charlie's Angels was released on November 3rd, 2000. This version of Charlie's Angels featured Drew Barrymore, Cameron Diaz, and Lucy Liu as the Angels. Bill Murray would play the role of Bosley, and the rest of the cast features names like Luke Wilson, Sam Rockwell, Matt LeBlanc, Tom Green, LL Cool J, Tim Curry, Crispin Glover, and more. On a budget of $93 million, the film would gross $264 million. While the film was successful, it had critics. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film had a 68% approval rating based on 146 reviews, with an average rating of 6.2 out of 10. The consensus reads, "Mixing tongue-in-cheek cheesecake with glossy action set pieces, Charlie's Angels is slick and reasonably fun despite its lack of originality." In 2019, the Charlie's Angels 2000 film also received retroactive criticism by modern writers, which we will address towards the end of this video. Charlie's Angels was a big enough hit to warrant a sequel in 2003 titled Charlie's Angels Full Throttle. The budget was increased, but the box office was stagnant, making $5 million less than the original. The general lack of interest in this sequel led to the Charlie's Angels franchise remaining dormant for another 8 years. In 2011, a TV reboot of Charlie's Angels debuted on ABC and was canceled after 7 episodes. After the failure of the TV series, it would take some time off until 2015 when development of a new film began. In September of that year, Sony Pictures Entertainment announced that it was rebooting Charlie's Angels, with Elizabeth Banks in talks to direct as well as produce. Banks was officially confirmed as the film's director in the following April. With Sony Pictures in charge, concern for Charlie's Angels began to arise. In 2016, Sony released their rebooted version of Ghostbusters, which drew ire from the fan base. The cast and crew of that film created a political spectacle around the release of Ghostbusters 2016, which ultimately killed the film. This is a topic we'll be covering later this month. In July 2018, it was announced that Kristen Stewart, Naomi Scott, and Ella Balinska would play the leading roles of the fighting team, and that Banks would also appear as a Bosley, with the film featuring multiple characters by that name, Patrick Stewart, as well as Djimon Hounsou. As the press began to talk about the upcoming Charlie's Angels film, some of Ghostbusters 2016's marketing tactics snuck their way into the Charlie's Angels playbook. In June of 2019, Banks, through website Collider, made a very political statement with Charlie's Angels 2019, stating that, "In 2019, we can't afford to not get political, even with escapist entertainment. So even though Elizabeth Banks' Charlie's Angels reboot is a high-stakes globe-trotting spy thriller comedy, she still made sure to send a message with extreme real-world ties within the story about female spies. Believe women." Letting female rage express itself is one of, if not the most important aspects of the new installment of Charlie's Angels. Banks, who directed, wrote, and co-stars, who tells Collider, along with a small group of journalists, "One of the ingredients to this movie was supporting and believing women," she says. "We literally have a character who is essentially working at a big corporation and is not being believed or listened to by her bosses." Collider would then ask, "How is the reboot going to be more feminist than the original?" To which Banks responds, "I honestly feel the property has all the bona fides of feminism already built in. I really didn't have to do much other than honor its entire history. By that I mean the original TV show was about women who went to a police academy but then were not allowed to actually be full police officers. They were given jobs of desk clerks or meter maids. Charlie Townsend came along and said, "Now you work for me. My name is Charlie," and gave them the opportunity to live their best life. I feel like this entire endeavor is about giving women the opportunity, including myself, to participate fully in a really big action franchise. Banks would do multiple interviews discussing the feminist aspects of a Charlie's Angels film throughout 2019. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Banks would go to say that the film is all about girl power. According to The Hollywood Reporter, she says that 2019 felt like the right time to make the reboot because these are trying times, and she explains that the original Charlie's Angels inspired her when she was younger. "I wanted to make a movie that celebrated women at work. When I watched the original show, I thought, those are professional women. That's a job that ladies get to do, and they looked incredible," she said. In another interview, Banks also said that it's important as a woman and as a filmmaker and as a feminist to recognize that I stand on the shoulders of the women that came before me, Banks said. "I thought that thematically, that was really appropriate to Charlie's Angels. I like to say that it's not my idea to turn Charlie's Angels from a TV show into a movie. It was Drew Barrymore's. I'm just building on what she started. The inclusivity and openness of all those scenes really matters to me. I really think it speaks to women and about how we should be conducting ourselves." On November 15th, 2019, Charlie's Angels was released. Initially, Charlie's Angels was supposed to be released on November 1st, but the film was pushed back 2 weeks as not to compete with Terminator Dark Fate. Dark Fate would feature a strong female lead and suffer the same fate as Charlie's Angels. On a budget of $55 million, Charlie's Angels brought in $8.6 million during its opening weekend. Hardly the hit Sony was banking on. Just weeks after the film's release, the conversation surrounding the film became the blame game. IndieWire would report on the situation. The well-received Charlie's Angels reboot is the latest studio box office bomb in the fall movie season, following in the footsteps of such disasters as The Goldfinch, Gemini Man, Motherless Brooklyn, and Terminator Dark Fate. The Elizabeth Banks-directed action comedy failed to crack $9 million at the box office over its opening weekend. Box office tracking had Charlie's Angels opening at an already disappointing $10 million, but the final total came in well below that mark. IndieWire box office expert says the film will be a significant loss for Sony this season. Prior to the movie's disastrous opening weekend, Banks gave an interview with the Herald Sun that is now proving to be somewhat controversial. The filmmaker, who also wrote and produced Charlie's Angels and stars in the movie as Bosley, called out a potential box office bomb as being sexist. "Look, people have to buy tickets to this movie too. The movie has to make money," she said. "If this movie doesn't make money, it reinforces a stereotype in Hollywood that men don't go to see women do action movies." As moviegoers were quick to point out on social media, Charlie's Angels bombing does not exactly prove that men will not go pay to see action movies driven by women. Earlier this year, Brie Larson's Captain Marvel grossed $426 million in the US. Wonder Woman ended its 2017 run with $821 million worldwide. But Banks says these female-fronted comic book movies are still tied into the larger male genre. "They'll go see a comic book movie with Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel because that's a male genre," Banks told The Sun. So even though these movies are all about women, they put them in the context of feeding the larger comic book world. So it's all about, yes, you're watching Wonder Woman, but we're setting up the 3 other characters, or we're setting up for the Justice League. Fans were confused by Banks' statement, as the narratives surrounding the aforementioned films all include a feminist slant. Wonder Woman was promoting female-only screenings at the Alamo Drafthouse, and Captain Marvel was sending little girls to the movie for free. After everything, it seems as if Banks' words were coming back to haunt her. During its entire theatrical life cycle, Charlie's Angels would earn $73 million against a $55 million budget. Compared to the 2000 film and its sequel, Charlie's Angels 2019 was an outright failure. But that's not the end of this story. In 2022, almost 3 years after her Charlie's Angels film failed to set cinema records on fire, Elizabeth Banks spoke on the film to Variety. Looking back at the poor box office performance of her 2019 Charlie's Angels reboot, Elizabeth Banks had some regrets about the film's marketing. "I wish that the movie had not been presented as just for girls, because I didn't go to make it just for girls," Banks told the New York Times. "There was a disconnect on the marketing side of it for me." Banks said that when women do things in Hollywood, it becomes this story. There was this story around Charlie's Angels that I was creating some feminist manifesto. I was just making an action movie. Banks recalled a time when a big producer of a big action movie told her that she couldn't direct an action movie because male actors were not going to follow me. Banks' Charlie's Angels cost Sony and its co-financiers $48 million, but it floundered at the North American box office with only $8.6 million in its opening weekend. Ahead of its release, Banks told the Herald Sun back in 2019, "If the movie doesn't make money, it reinforces a stereotype in Hollywood that men don't go to see women do action movies." There may be some validity to Banks' statement, as Terminator Dark Fate, the film that caused Charlie's Angels to move its initial release date, failed miserably. Other female-led action films have had similar fates. These films only go on to reaffirm what Banks flippantly said. While Elizabeth Banks is a competent filmmaker, action was not her forte. In 2012, Banks produced Pitch Perfect, a highly successful musical comedy. She would go on to direct the sequel, which grossed $250 million worldwide. Banks' next film, Cocaine Bear, is slated for a 2023 release. Why Charlie's Angels failed is a multifaceted answer. No one's disputing that the film failed, but the why is a little more difficult to pin down. Female-led action films do make money. Films like Lucy, Atomic Blonde, Wonder Woman, and the Resident Evil and Underworld film franchises have all grossed in the hundreds of millions of dollars territory, with some in the billions. The narrative surrounding those films is much different than Charlie's Angels, Men in Black International, and Ghostbusters 2016. All of those films failed too, but their marketing and promotion was much more upfront with its political message. Films marketed like that do not succeed. Audiences steer clear of them. When filmmakers like Elizabeth Banks, Tim Miller, and Paul Feig take this approach, their films suffer. The box office data corroborates this. There's also another culprit. It's Charlie's Angels itself. It's a 45-year-old show that already had its film series revival in 2000. Charlie's Angels came on the heels of the TV show movie craze. The 90s also saw a renewed interest in 70s culture. Films like Boogie Nights, The Ice Storm, and Dazed and Confused were all set in the 70s. Star Wars returned, and that 70s show tied everything together at the end of the decade. These events are the real reason Charlie's Angels was a success in 2000, alongside 3 very popular actresses and a cast of then A-list talent. There's also the studio. They didn't have much faith in this film either. The 2019 film had roughly half the budget of the 2000 film. Sony knew that Charlie's Angels was dead on arrival. In 2019, critics even attempted to reevaluate the film as bad. Vanity Fair writer Ashley Spencer states, the film, which was released 19 years prior, left a complicated legacy. She wrote, there were multiple scenes of cultural appropriation, including Barrymore's character in brownface, the angels wearing geisha costumes while posing as massage therapists, and Diaz and Lou's characters belly dancing with bindis. Mamma Mia writer Jessica Wang called the film pretty problematic, positing 4 points that made the film outdated. 1. The film was made for the male gaze. 2. Cultural appropriation. 3. Lou's characters not being empowering. 4. Employing the ditzy female trope. The Ringer's Manuela Lazic wrote the film's largely goofy and entertaining, albeit using racist imagery. The failure of Charlie's Angels will ultimately be used as a cautionary tale. Like Ghostbusters 2016 before it, it's a film that no one wanted, marketed in an unsavory way, and when it all fell apart, no one was surprised. So now I want to know what everyone here has to say. Here are today's 3 questions. 1. Do you have a favorite Charlie's Angels film? 2. Do you have a favorite angel? 3. Are you surprised that the 2019 film failed? So folks, thank you for watching. Make sure you hit that thumbs up button, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, and make sure you check out titsandart.com. TNA is my newest book. It features lovely women in beautiful fantasy settings. It's a big 11x17 book. It's available now for $20, and you can get yourselves a copy guaranteed delivery by Christmas. Link in the description below. But that's it for today, folks. Thank you for watching. Be smart, be safe, be cool, but always be excellent to each other.